Hi there and welcome to this week's online lecture, Occupation in Occupational Therapy. And really the aim of this is to start or to further put together some of the things we've been doing over the first few weeks, and particularly thinking about occupation within occupational therapy, what that looks like essentially. And the two things I want to do this week are really think about occupation in occupational therapy from a historical perspective, and then also to get you thinking about what it looks like in practice when you're with a client, an individual, group or community. To do that, what I'm going to borrow is Gary Kielhofner is an occupational therapist you will hear a lot about, and he has done a really fantastic job of documenting the history of the profession, and he's borrowed this way of thinking about things, which I've mentioned once or twice already, but just to give you a bit more detail. In this way of thinking about when you think about a profession, so for us as occupational therapy, there were a number of forces that led to the development of occupational therapy, and those forces are in the pre-paradigm down the bottom left-hand corner. What that results in is a group of people who think similarly about something, and I'll say more about that in a second, and they work within a particular paradigm. They continue working in that paradigm until some sort of crisis causes them to think differently and then go back and reshape or develop a new paradigm. And so the history of the profession is very much the top half of that screen, paradigm until there's a crisis, development of a new paradigm, and so on in that cycle. In terms of what a paradigm is, Gary Kielhofner borrowed or used work from Thomas Kuhn, who looked at science and the development of science. And in that, a paradigm is that way of thinking about things that captures the shared commitment or beliefs of members of that group, in our case occupational therapy. It also includes those shared rules and standards for practice, and also recognises that there is an accepted model or pattern for seeing the world and seeing the way and seeing things within that group. And so the net result of all of that is that it causes members of that community to see the world in a very particular way. And so that's what the paradigm is. Thinking then about pre-paradigm, there are two things that are credited with leading to, causing, influencing the development of occupational therapy. One was the moral treatment movement, which I said a bit about during O Week. So the moral treatment movement was recognising that there was a different way of working with supporting people with mental health difficulties many centuries ago. And so rather than lock them up and chain them up, which is what you can see a bit of in this picture, the view was, let's engage people with mental health difficulties in those day-to-day tasks that needed to be done around the institution. And so what we would call occupation, but it took off as a way of working with and supporting people with mental health conditions. The other driving force that led to the development of occupational therapy was the arts and craft movement, and this William Morris wallpaper is an example of some of the work that came out of that period. And it was really a recognition that engaging people in arts and crafts was useful for the body, in that it was active, it engaged people's abilities and all those sorts of things, but also, as it says up here, it was a medicine for the body as well as the soul. So recognising that it had some psychological, emotional, but also social benefits to engaging people in arts and crafts. So those things, and a few others, but they're the two key things, those eventually ended up in the development of, or the founding of, the National Society for the Promotion of Occupational Therapy in 1917 in America. There are other places where the history of OT has been traced back much earlier than 1917, but in terms of the modern profession, this was really the key event. And so thinking about the paradigm, so the paradigm around this time when the profession was formed included beliefs and ideas around the essential role of activity in human life and health or occupation, the idea that mind and body were inextricably linked and influenced each other, that a lack of occupation could result in damage to the mind and or the body, and that we could use occupation to regenerate lost function. And so they were some of the principles, I guess, that guided practice of the early occupational therapists after the founding in 1917 in the States. However, so things went on quite well, and then there was a crisis, and that crisis in this case was around maybe the 1950s or so, 1960s, and was really a push from the medical profession that occupational therapy was very closely aligned with at that time, a push from the medical profession for occupational therapy to become more scientific. And so what resulted from that was the mechanistic paradigm or the reductionist paradigm. And so in this way of seeing humans and their difficulties, it was very much about the ability to perform being dependent on system integrity. And just have a think about some of the words that are being used here. System integrity, we're talking about humans. System damage or abnormal development could lead to incapacity, and that functional performance could be restored by addressing system limitations. So the view here was much more that the human body was a system, a complex system, and when things went wrong, either because of developmental issues or because of illness, disease, or disability, the aim of occupational therapy was to either fix whatever that issue was or to compensate for that in some way. And so the profession continued on in that way, working with people in that way until there was a crisis in about the 1970s. And the crisis then was a recognition that that very mechanistic way of working with people wasn't working for some. So particularly thinking about people with chronic illness, lifelong conditions, where things can't be cured or fixed, that mechanistic way of working wasn't working. And so the profession entered a crisis. What's happened since then is the profession, well, Gary Kielhoffner has suggested the profession has entered a contemporary paradigm, but I think there are still some questions about whether or not, if you think about a paradigm being how the whole profession views the world, I think there are still some questions about whether or not occupational therapy is in that contemporary paradigm. Nonetheless, the key underpinning beliefs and assumptions and perspectives within the contemporary paradigm are the idea that humans have an occupational nature, and this isn't just that it's nice to engage in occupation, it's that it's absolutely crucial and central to humans, and indeed some would argue it is what separates us from other species. Secondly, when occupational therapists who are working in a contemporary paradigm think about the issues, the problems or the challenges that their clients are facing, they think about them first and foremost as occupational issues, problems, challenges. And then finally, in terms of thinking about how we go about working with people who are facing those challenges, it's very much about occupation-based practice. So the concern is very much for getting people back to doing what they want, need and have to do, but also, in my view at least, ideally working with them, engaging them in occupation as part of that journey to get them back to doing the occupations they need, want and have to do. So that's a little bit about the history of occupational therapy. One of the things that is interesting to think about is all of that is history, it's philosophy in some sense, but what does it mean for occupational therapy practice? What does occupational therapy practice, which is very occupationally based, what does that look like? And the chapter you've got to read this week covers some of that, and we'll talk more about that in classes this week. I just want you to start to think about, however, what do you think occupation in occupational therapy could look like? Just a very simple occupational therapy process here, and again, we'll learn more about this as things develop. When an occupational therapist works with a client, there are, at this stage, 3 broad stages for you to think about. One is the assessment phase, so coming to understand and understand the client as an occupational being, and identifying with the client what their occupational issues and challenges might be. Once you've done that, then thinking about planning your intervention or your therapeutic intervention. What are you going to do with that person to enable them to address those occupational challenges? And then once you've planned it, you've got to implement it and do the occupational therapy with that person. So what I'd like you to think about, and again, some of it's in the book chapter, is start to think about what do you think occupation-based occupational therapy would look like when it comes to assessment, planning and intervention.